He was twice her size, twice as loud, and full of pride. But in 47 seconds he hit the floor. And she didn't even smile. The heavy bass of the music vibrated through the concrete floor, a relentless pulse that seemed to sync with the thud of fists against leather. Sweat, stale beer, and something metallic hung in the air. A scent Ilara had come to associate with Tuesday nights. She stood near the back, a ghost in the swirling, boisterous crowd. No one looked at her, no one spoke to her. She was just another shadow, clinging to the walls of the warehouse-turned-illegal fight club. A roar went up, shaking the corrugated iron roof. In the center of the room, inside a chain-link cage barely illuminated by a single, low-hanging industrial lamp, a mountain of a man named Cyrus dropped his opponent with a final, brutal right hook. The sound of the body hitting the canvas was a wet, definitive smack. The crowd surged, a wave of shouting, and exchanged money. Ilara didn't flinch. She just watched, her gaze steady, her expression unreadable. She took a slow sip of her water, the plastic bottle crinkling softly in her hand. All right, settle down, you animals," a voice boomed over a crackling speaker. It was Marco, the organizer, a man whose gut preceded him by a good few inches. "Give it up for Cyrus. Another win, another payday." The cheers eventually subsided, replaced by a low, expectant hum. This was the moment they were all waiting for. "And now," Marco's voice dropped, taking on a showman's gravelly tone, "for our main event. The man you're all here to see. The undefeated, the undisputed, the king of the cage, Jax!" The warehouse erupted. This was a different kind of cheer, laced with a hero worship that bordered on mania. Ilara watched as a figure emerged from a makeshift tunnel of cheering bodies. Jax was everything the crowd wanted him to be. He was a sculpture, of muscle and confidence, his face a roadmap of old scars that only seemed to add to his appeal. He vaulted over the cage door, landing with a cat-like grace, and raised his arms to the ceiling, soaking in the adoration. A wide, cocky grin never left his face. He bounced on the balls of his feet, his gloved fists tapping a restless rhythm against each other. He looked hungry. He looked invincible. Ilara's eyes never left him. She saw the slight favor he gave his left knee, the way he exhaled sharply through his nose after a quick combination. Tiny details, insignificant to the roaring mob, but glaring to her. Marco stepped up to the cage, a microphone in his hand. He waited for the noise to die down, but it only seemed to swell with Jax's presence. After a moment, Marco cleared his throat, his voice straining to be heard. "Now, to face our champion. From the south side. The Demolition Man Dante." The crowd turned as one, their collective gaze sweeping over the entrance Dante was supposed to walk through. They waited. A few seconds passed. The energy began to shift, the anticipation curdling into confusion. Marco leaned into his microphone again, a note of irritation in his voice. "Dante? Let's go, kid. We ain't got all night." Still nothing. The music, which had dipped to a low thrum, now felt awkward. A few people started murmuring. Jax, still bouncing in the cage, dropped his arms and shrugged, his grin tightening at the edges. He hated waiting. Marco's face was turning a blotchy red. He spoke in a harsh whisper to one of his runners, a wiry kid named Leo. The conversation was short and angry. Leo scurried away into the darkness. Minutes stretched into an eternity in the stuffy warehouse. The crowd grew restless, their shouts turning from cheers to jeers. "Where is he? Let's get on with it." Did he chicken out? Finally, Leo reappeared, whispering frantically into Marco's ear. Marco's face fell. He looked like a man who had just watched his wallet fall into a storm drain. He grabbed the microphone, his knuckles white. "Folks," he began, his voice flat. It seems Dante is a no-show." A collective groan of disappointment rolled through the crowd. Boos and angry shouts followed. This was the main event. This was what they had paid for. Jax slammed his gloved fist against the chain-link fence, the rattle cutting through the noise. "You're kidding me!" he yelled, his voice raw with frustration. "Another one? No one wants to fight?" He paced the cage like a trapped tiger, radiating pure, unfiltered anger. He had trained for this. He lived for this. The adoration was a drug, but the fight was the air he breathed. Marco held up his hands, trying to placate the increasingly hostile mob. I know. Believe me, I'm as disappointed as you are. We'll get it sorted. Partial refunds at the door. That was the wrong thing to say. The crowd surged forward, a tide of anger directed at the cage and the man who had just promised them less money back. It was in that moment of chaos, with Marco overwhelmed and Jax fuming, that a clear, calm voice cut through the noise. I'll fight him. The words were not shouted, but they carried a strange authority that made people turn. The crowd parted slightly, like water moving around a stone. Alara stepped forward, out of the shadows. She moved with a quiet purpose, her hands in the pockets of her simple gray hoodie. She stopped a few feet from the cage, her gaze fixed on Marco. For a moment, there was just stunned silence. Then a ripple of laughter started near the front, spreading quickly through the warehouse until it was a tidal wave of derision. Men nudged each other, pointing. Women covered their mouths, shaking their heads in disbelief. She was of average height, slender, with no visible muscle to speak of. She looked like someone who had taken a wrong turn and ended up in a nightmare. Marco stared at her, his mouth agape. You? Honey, this isn't a fitness class. Go home before you get hurt. Inside the cage, Jax had stopped pacing. He leaned against the fence, a slow, incredulous smile spreading across his face. It wasn't his usual cocky grin. This was different. This was pure amusement. He let out a short, sharp laugh. You hear that, Marco? He called out, his voice dripping with condescension. She wants to fight me. He looked Alara up and down, his eyes lingering on her slight frame. He laughed again, a deep, rumbling sound that the crowd eagerly joined. He laughed when she stepped into the cage. Alara didn't respond to Marco. Her eyes shifted from the organizer to the champion. She met his mocking gaze directly, her own expression as placid as a frozen lake. She pulled the water bottle from her pocket and took another small, deliberate sip. The sound of the plastic crinkling seemed impossibly loud in the brief lull between laughs. She simply held his gaze, waiting. Her silence was more unsettling than any threat could have been. It unnerved him, just for a second. The laughter died, in his throat. He saw something in her eyes, a stillness that didn't belong here. Marco, desperate to salvage his night, finally threw his hands up in the air. Fine, whatever. You want to get your ass handed to you? Be my guest. It's your funeral. He turned to the crowd. Looks like we have a volunteer, folks. A real lamb to the slaughter. The crowd roared its approval, the mood shifting from anger to morbid curiosity. This would be a spectacle, if not a fight. One of Marco's men held the cage door open, for her. As she walked past him, he muttered, You got a death wish, lady? Alara ignored him. She stepped inside the cage, the heavy door clanging shut behind her. The sound echoed, a final metallic note of commitment. She stood on the canvas, the single light from above casting a long shadow behind her. She was 20 feet from Jax. The air was thick with the promise of violence. Jax pushed himself off the fence and began to circle her, his movements slow and predatory. You got a name? He asked, his voice low. Alara pulled her hands from her pockets. She began to slowly, methodically, wrap them with worn gray hand wraps she produced from her hoodie. Her movements were precise, economical, practiced. They used to call me something else, she said, her voice even and low, almost a whisper. Yet it carried across the sudden silence of the cage. But you can call me Alara. Jax stopped, circling. He watched her wrap her hands, the smile finally vanishing from his face, replaced by a flicker of something else. Confusion? Annoyance? He couldn't quite place it. He just knew the joke wasn't funny anymore. The bell rang, a shrill, piercing sound that signaled the start. Jax took a half step forward, loose and easy. He wasn't even in a proper fighting stance. He threw a lazy jab, a rangefinder, aimed more at her pride than her person. It was a message. This is my world. You are a tourist here. Alara wasn't. There, she didn't duck or weave or flinch. She simply shifted her weight to her back foot, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement that took her head a mere 2 inches out of the punch's path. The glove sliced through the air where her face had been, the sound a soft whoosh in the tense silence. Jax blinked. He hadn't expected to connect, not really, but he hadn't expected such an effortless evasion. He shook it off, a small smirk returning to his lips. Lucky move. He moved in again, a little faster this time, throwing a quick 1-2 combination. A jab, then a cross. Basic, effective. Enough to put down most amateurs. Again, Ilara moved. A slight pivot, a small dip of the shoulder. The jabs whistled past her ears. Her feet barely seemed to leave the canvas, yet she flowed like smoke, always just beyond his reach. She didn't retreat. She just wasn't where he aimed. Her eyes never left his chest, tracking the subtle telegraphs of his muscles. The crowd, which had been baying for blood, grew quiet. The initial jeers and laughter were replaced by a low, confused murmur. This wasn't the clumsy spectacle they had anticipated. This was something different. Jax's smirk vanished completely. The annoyance was back, stronger this time. He stopped, circling and planted his feet. "Stand still," he grunted, the first words spoken since the bell. He lunged, throwing a powerful right hook meant to end the farce then and there. It was a power punch, the kind that had earned him his reputation, carrying all his weight and frustration behind it. The crowd let out a collective gasp, anticipating the brutal impact. Ilara didn't retreat. She moved into it. In a fluid motion, she ducked under the swinging arm, her body brushing so close to his she could have counted the beads of sweat on his ribs. As his arm passed over her head, she placed a single open palm flat against his back. It wasn't a push or a strike. It was just a touch, a calm, grounding touch that felt strangely intimate and utterly dismissive in the heart of the cage. The momentum of his own missed punch carried him forward, stumbling past her and into the chain-link fence. He caught himself before he fell, the metal rattling loudly throughout the warehouse. He turned, his face now a mask of fury and humiliation. The crowd was utterly silent. No one was laughing now. They were watching, transfixed. "You think this is a game?" he snarled, spitting on the canvas. He abandoned all pretense of toying with her. He came at her now with genuine, unrestrained violence. A flurry of punches rained down, hooks, crosses, uppercuts. He was faster than Cyrus, stronger than anyone else she had seen in this place. Each blow was thrown with knockout intent, each one capable of shattering bone, and none of them landed. It was a dance. Ilara moved with an impossible grace, a masterclass in defensive movement. She parried a jab with the back of her hand, deflected. A cross with her forearm, slipped under a hook. Her feet were a blur on the mat, a constant shifting foundation for her liquid evasions. She never took her eyes off him, her expression unchanging, her breathing steady and even. The only sounds were Jax's grunts of exertion, the whistle of his gloves through empty air, and the soft scuff of her shoes on the canvas. To the crowd, it was mesmerizing. It was unbelievable. The invincible champion, the king of the cage, was swinging at a ghost. He was punching himself out, wasting all his energy on a phantom. They could see the bewilderment growing in his eyes, the confusion warring with his rage. Marco, standing by the cage door, gripped the chain-link fence, his jaw hanging slack. He had seen hundreds of fights. He had never seen anything like this. This wasn't a lamb to the slaughter. He didn't know what this was. Jax began to slow, his movements becoming heavier, his breathing ragged. The relentless, fruitless assault was draining him. A sheen of sweat covered his body, and his combinations grew sloppy. The snap was gone from his punches. He paused, bent over, his hands on his knees, gasping for air. "What are you?" he wheezed, looking up at her from under his brow. It wasn't a taunt. It was a genuine question. Ilara hadn't even broken a sweat. She stood perfectly still in the center of the cage, her wrapped hands held loosely at her sides. She gave him a moment to recover, a silent offering of mercy that was somehow more insulting than any punch. "You're tired," she stated, her voice calm and devoid of judgment. That simple observation seemed to snap something inside him. With a roar of pure frustration, he launched himself at her, not with fists, but with his entire body, intending to tackle her, to crush her against the fence with his superior weight and strength. It was his final, desperate gambit. As he lunged, Ilara moved for the first time with offensive intent. As he closed the distance, she dropped her center of gravity and pivoted sharply on her lead foot. She didn't try to stop his momentum. She used it. She dipped her shoulder, caught his charging form, and redirected him. It was a perfect hip throw, a maneuver of pure leverage and timing that looked utterly effortless. Jax, for all his size and power, was suddenly airborne. He sailed over her hip, his eyes wide with shock. The warehouse was so quiet that the sound of his body hitting the canvas was like a thunderclap. He landed hard on his back, the impact knocking the wind from his lungs with a choked gasp. He lay there, stunned, staring up at the single harsh light, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. He, Jax, the undefeated champion, was on the floor, and she was standing over him. Ilara looked down, not with triumph, but with a quiet intensity. The defensive shell was gone. Now, her eyes held a different light. This was no longer a demonstration. It was a reckoning. She took a slow, deliberate step toward him. For the first time since stepping into the cage, she raised her wrapped fists into a fighting stance. The crowd watched, breathless, as the ghost finally prepared to strike. He had asked what she was. He was about to find out. 47 seconds had passed since the opening bell. Jax scrambled backward on the canvas, crab-walking away from her, his breath coming in ragged, panicked gulps. The world had turned upside down. The floor was supposed to be for his opponents, a place he put people. He wasn't supposed to be the one looking up. The fear he usually inspired in others was now a cold knot in his own stomach. He saw his invincibility crack and shatter in the 47 seconds he had been in the cage with her. He pushed himself to his feet, unsteady, his legs feeling like lead. He raised his gloves, but the posture was different. It was no longer the confident stance of a champion. It was the desperate defensive crouch of a man who knew he was outmatched. The rage was gone, replaced by a raw, primal fear. Ilara flowed forward. She didn't rush. Her steps were measured, deliberate, closing the distance with an unnerving calm. Her wrapped fists were up now, tucked tight to her chin, her body a coiled spring of potential energy. Jax saw her coming and threw a wild, desperate right hand. It was a prayer more than a punch. Ilara swayed her head to the left, the blow missing by a comfortable margin. As his arm overextended, she stepped inside, into the pocket, the most dangerous place to be. But for her, it was home. Pop. It wasn't a loud sound. It was sharp, concise, the sound of a perfectly placed strike. Her left fist had shot out, a quick piston-like jab that connected squarely with his solar plexus. It wasn't thrown with all her force, but with surgical precision. All the air rushed out of Jax's lungs in a single, silent whoosh. His eyes bulged. His entire body seized up, every muscle paralyzed by the shock to his diaphragm. His arms dropped to his sides, his gloves suddenly feeling like they weighed 100 pounds each. Before he could even process the pain, she struck again. Pop, pop. 2 more lightning-fast shots, not to his head, but to his body. 1 to the ribs, 1 to the liver. Each one landed with the same precise, compact thud. Each one sent a new bolt of agony through his system. He doubled over, a strangled groan escaping his lips. He was helpless. His offense gone, his defense dismantled, his body refusing to obey his commands. The crowd was a statue. They had come for a brutal spectacle, and they were getting one, but not the one they paid for. They weren't watching a fight. They were watching a master at work. They were witnessing the systematic deconstruction of a king. The sounds of her strikes were small, but in the dead silent warehouse, they were as loud as gunshots. Ilara looked at the broken champion. Before her, he was gasping, his face pale, his eyes pleading. He was finished. She could see it, he could feel it, everyone could see it. She could have ended it right there. A hook to the jaw, a knee to the head. It would have been easy. It would have been What this crowd, in any other circumstance, would have wanted. But she didn't. She took a half step back, giving him space. She lowered her fists. Jax, seeing his chance, thinking it was a mistake, an opening, summoned the last of his strength. With a guttural yell, he lunged, swinging a final looping haymaker, putting every ounce of his remaining energy, pride, and fear into it. Alara watched it come. She didn't slip it. She didn't duck under it. She caught it. Her left hand shot up, open-palmed, and simply intercepted his wrist in mid-air. Her grip was like iron. The punch stopped dead, inches from her face. The force of it, with nowhere to go, traveled back up Jax's arm, and he cried out, his shoulders screaming in protest. He stood there, his fist caught in her hand, his body trembling with exhaustion and pain. He stared into her eyes, and for the first time, he truly saw her. He didn't see a woman or a lamb to the slaughter. He saw a past he couldn't comprehend. He saw discipline forged in a fire he'd never known. He saw a quiet, unshakable power that went beyond muscle and rage. Slowly, deliberately, Alara squeezed. A sickening crack echoed through the warehouse. Jax screamed, a raw, high-pitched sound of pure agony, and collapsed to his knees, clutching his broken wrist. He curled into a ball on the canvas, defeated not by a knockout blow, but by a quiet, controlled act of utter dominance. The fight was over. Alara stood over him for a moment, her breathing still steady, her expression calm. There was no gloating, no victory dance. She simply looked at the man on the floor, then turned and walked toward the cage door. Marco, his face ashen, fumbled with the latch and pulled it open for her, averting his eyes as if he were in the presence of royalty. She stepped out of the cage, the same way she had stepped in, a ghost emerging from the light, back into the shadows. The crowd parted for her, a sea of silent, awe-struck faces. The men who had laughed now stared at the floor. The women who had mocked her now watched with a mixture of fear and admiration. They didn't just see a fighter. They saw the calm in the center of a storm. They saw the quietest person in the room, was, by far, the most dangerous. She walked through the silent mob, heading for the exit. She didn't look at any of them. As she reached the door, Marco, finally finding his voice, called out to her, his tone laced with a desperate respect. "Wait. Who are you? Where did you learn to do that?" Alara paused in the doorway, her back still to him, a silhouette against the dim light of the alley outside. She didn't turn around. She just spoke, her voice carrying across the silent room, a final, dignified statement that answered everything and nothing at all. "This was never a cage for me.